March 17th, 1969. Firebase Shepherd, 6 kilometers south of the DMZ. The NVA were inside the wire. Specialist James Keller had 30 seconds to break every artillery rule he'd ever learned or watch 87 Americans die. His howitzers were designed to shoot over hills at targets kilometers away, not at enemy soldiers 50 meters in front of him. The backblast alone could kill his own gun crews. The manual said it was suicide. But conventional defense had already failed. What Keller did next, firing 6 howitzers like giant shotguns directly into the breached perimeter, would either save Firebase Shepherd or turn it into a crater. For the next 4 hours, mathematics would matter more than courage. And the NVA would learn why American firebases weren't just artillery positions. They were killing zones. James Keller didn't choose Vietnam. Born in 1947 in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, he was supposed to take over his father's hardware store on Market Street. The Kellers had run that store since 1923. Jimmy was good with numbers, the one who'd go to Wilkes College at night and keep the books during the day. Then the draft lottery chose him. October 1967. Report for induction, January 1968. His girlfriend Linda cried. His father, a Normandy veteran, shook his hand and said, quote, "Do your job. Come home." The first part turned out to be easier than the second. Fort Sill, Oklahoma. January through April 1968. Artillery training. Keller tested high enough that they made him a fire direction control specialist. While other guys learned to hump rucksacks through jungle, Keller learned trigonometry, learned to plot firing solutions, learned to calculate propellant charges and deflection adjustments. But here's what they didn't teach him. What happens when the enemy is already inside your wire and your howitzers, designed to shoot at targets 5 kilometers away, become useless? He flew to Vietnam in June 1968 on a commercial 707, landed at Tan Son Nhut at 0300. The heat poured in like something solid. The smell hit next jet fuel, garbage, human waste. A sweetness he'd learned was rotting vegetation. A Spec 4 with 350 days in country processed him. Quote, "Where are you headed, Cherry?" Quote, "Artillery." I-Corps. Quote, "Then you're fucked. Enjoy the DMZ." 3 days later, Keller arrived at Firebase Shepherd 6 105mm howitzers on a low hill, concertina wire, claymore mines, and a perimeter that probably wouldn't stop a determined assault. The Firebase's mission was simple on paper: provide artillery support, interdict enemy movement, don't get overrun. But Keller noticed something in the after-action reports from other firebases. Firebase Kate nearly overrun in 1968. Firebase Crook, where NVA got inside the wire and the guns couldn't engage. The same problem kept appearing. When the enemy breached the perimeter, artillery became useless. The guns could shoot for miles, but not at their own feet. So why were firebases so vulnerable? The answer was doctrine, and Vietnam broke all the rules. In conventional warfare, artillery positions sat behind front lines, protected by infantry. Enemy attacks came from kilometers away, giving crews time to adjust fire. But Vietnam had no front lines. The enemy was everywhere, a 360-degree threat. American firebases sat on hilltops in hostile territory, often surrounded by jungle that pressed against the wire like something alive. The NVA hated them. Every firebase represented artillery tubes that could drop shells on their supply routes, their staging areas, their assault formations. Taking one out meant silencing American firepower and proving they could hit us anywhere. The NVA method was precise. Watch for weeks, learning patrol patterns and guard rotations, then hit at night with mortars first, blowing gaps in the wire. Sappers would rush through carrying AK-47s and satchel charges before artillery could respond. Because here's the problem. M101 howitzers were designed for indirect fire. You calculated range, elevation, and propellant charge. Fired at angles measured in mils. Hit targets you couldn't see, sometimes 5 kilometers away. But when enemy soldiers were 50 meters from your gun position, you couldn't depress the barrel enough to fire. The math didn't work. The gun couldn't physically point at them. And that's when firebases got overrun. Sergeant First Class Willis Garrett Keller's FDC chief, 16 months in country, caught Keller one night at his plotting board, calculating strange angles. Quote, "The hell you doing, Keller?" Quote, "Calculating something." Quote, "Calculating what?" Quote, "What if we fired beehive rounds straight at the wire? Not indirect fire, direct fire. Like the guns were shotguns. Beehive rounds M546 shells packed with 8,000 steel flechettes each. Designed for ambushes, for firing into tree lines at medium range, not for shooting at your own perimeter." Garrett stared at him. Quote, "You'd kill your own gun crews with the backblast." Quote, "Only if they weren't in the bunkers, and only if we waited until the NVA were already inside the wire when we'd be dead anyway." Quote, "Captain would never approve that." Quote, "Captain's in Da Nang half the time." Keller looked at his calculations. Quote, "And if it comes to it, Sergeant, you know they're not going to ask permission. They're just going to come." Garrett didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. March 17th, 1969, 21:30 hours. The patrol that went out that morning came back 2 men short, ambushed on the trail to Hill 243. Lieutenant Deaver looked hollowed out when he trudged through the wire. Quote, "They're out there," he told Captain Marsh. Quote, "A lot of them. Intelligence said maybe a probe. Nothing major." Keller wanted to scream. Intelligence was always wrong. At 2100, the listening posts started reporting movement. Vietnamese voices, branches snapping, something big moving through the jungle. Captain Marsh ordered illumination rounds. The mortars fired, parachute flares popping at 800 feet, harsh white light flooding the canopy. Nothing visible, just trees. The NVA were still under the canopy. Then, at 21:37, all 3 listening posts reported simultaneously, quote, "They're coming. Jesus Christ, they're everywhere." LP4 screamed once, then went silent. The first NVA mortar round hit at 2141 southwest corner, then 3 more walking across the gun positions. 1 round landed directly on gun 3. Keller heard the crump, heard screaming. Then the sappers hit the wire. Bangalore torpedoes detonated in 3 places simultaneously, blowing gaps in the concertina wire. Claymore mines shredded the first wave, but more kept coming. AK-47 fire raked the bunkers. RPG rounds streaked across the perimeter. The perimeter bunkers opened up with M60s and M16s. Tracers lit the darkness. Marsh called for support. Quote, "This is Shepherd 6. We are underground assault." Da Nang was calm. Quote, "Spooky is 1 to 5 mics out. Hold your position. 15 minutes. The firebase would be overrun in 5. Sergeant Garrett coordinated defensive fire's standard doctrine. Quote, "Grid November. Foxtrot 847293. Deflection 2800. Charge 5. The guns fired over the wire, shells screaming out, detonating 400 meters north. But the NVA weren't 400 meters out anymore. They were at the wire, inside the wire. Through the FDC window, Keller saw muzzle flashes from inside the perimeter. Gun 5's crew was firing M16s, not their howitzer. The enemy was too close. An NVA sapper team reached Gun 6. The crew cut them down with an M60. 3 more came behind them. Standard artillery doctrine had just failed. Keller watched Gun 6's crew die, watched sappers reach the gun position, watched the sergeant pull the lanyard on his howitzer in desperation, firing a high-explosive round at minimum elevation. The backblast killed him. The round flew 200 feet and detonated uselessly in the jungle. But Keller had seen something. What if you fired beehive rounds not high explosive at 0 elevation? Each M546 beehive round contained 8,000 steel flechettes, tiny darts designed to shred infantry. If you fired at 0 elevation, at 50 meters, those flechettes would turn the breach points into a kill zone 40 meters wide. The risks were terrifying. The backblast might kill the gun crews. The flechettes might ricochet and hit American positions. The guns might explode from the stress. But the alternative was watching the NVA overrun every position one by one. Keller grabbed Garrett's shoulder. Quote, "Sergeant, we need to load beehive. All guns. Direct fire at the wire." Garrett's face was white. Quote, "We'll kill our own people." Quote, "They're already dying. Get everyone into bunkers. Load beehive. Fire straight at the wire gaps. Garrett looked at the map. At NVA swarming through 3 wire gaps. At gun crews fighting hand to hand. He grabbed the radio. Quote, "All guns. Garrett actual. Cease indirect fire. Load beehive rounds. Deflection 0. Stand by for direct fire." Quote, "Say again, FDC?" Gun 2's chief sounded panicked. Quote, "You heard me. Get your crews in bunkers. Load beehive. Prep for direct fire into the wire." Captain Marsh heard it. Quote, "FDC, this is Shepherd 6. Belay that order." Garrett looked at Keller. Keller looked at the perimeter, where NVA were now 30 meters from Gun 4. Garrett keyed the radio. Quote, "Shepherd 6. Recommend you take cover. Executing direct fire now. Court-martial if they survived. If they survived, Gun 4. Sergeant Kowalski from Chicago. 6-man crew." They heard the order and thought FDC had lost its mind. But Kowalski saw NVA sappers 40 meters out, coming fast, and made a decision. Quote, "Into the bunker. Rodriguez, grab the beehive." The M5-46 round weighed 33 pounds. Rodriguez yanked it from the ammo pit, rammed it into the breech. Kowalski set propellant to charge 1 minimum power, minimum range. AK rounds snapped overhead. An RPG streaked past, missing by 3 feet. Rodriguez slammed the breech, closed, and dove into the bunker. Kowalski grabbed the lanyard cord, pointed the howitzer at the wire gap 50 meters north, not aiming up, but almost straight ahead, and pulled himself into the bunker entrance. If Keller's math was wrong, Rodriguez would die in the backblast. The flechettes might shred friendly positions. The gun might explode. But the NVA were 20 meters away. Kowalski pulled the lanyard. The howitzer roared. Not the familiar sound of indirect fire. This was deeper, more violent, like the earth itself screaming. The muzzle blast created a visible shockwave red clay dust, exploding in all directions. The backblast erupted from the breech, a cone of superheated gas that would have killed anyone standing behind the gun. But the crew was in the bunker. They felt the heat wash over them, but they didn't burn. The M5-46 round traveled 50 meters in 0.3 seconds. At 35 meters, the time fuse triggered. 8,000 steel flechettes released in a cone pattern 40 meters wide. The NVA, sapper team, 12 men, all within 5 meters of the breach, ceased to exist. Flechettes shredded flesh, severed limbs, punched through bone, bodies fell in pieces. The concertina wire itself was shredded. The ground looked like someone had run a giant cheese grater across it. Then silence. Not complete silence. Moaning, screaming. But the AK-47 fire from the north gap had stopped completely. Kowalski pulled his head out of the bunker. Through the smoke, nothing moved in the kill zone. His radio crackled. Keller's voice, quote, "Gun 4, did it work?" Kowalski's voice came out hoarse. Quote, "Yeah, holy fuck, yeah, it worked." In the FDC, Keller marked Gun 4's success and immediately adjusted for the other guns. Quote, "All guns, FDC. Gun 4 confirms effect. Gun 2, deflection 3-200, northwest gap. Gun 5, deflection 2-400, west gap. Fire on my command." The crews moved with desperate deficiency, loading beehive while under fire, traversing the massive howitzers to point at wire gaps 50 to 80 meters away. Gun 2, commanded by Staff Sergeant Nguyen, a Vietnamese American from California, physically pushed the gun trail left. An NVA round snapped past his head. He ignored it. Quote, "Set." Keller checked his plot one last time. If his deflections were wrong, the flechettes would hit American positions. Gun 2's blast might hit the aid station. Gun 5's might shred the command bunker. But the alternative was watching the NVA overrun them, position by position. Quote, "All guns, fire." 3 howitzers fired within 2 seconds. The sound was apocalyptic. 3 overlapping roars. 3 muzzle blasts lighting the firebase like daylight. The ground shook. Keller counted. 1, 2, 3. The flechettes hit. Gun 2's round caught the northwest breach, just as an NVA squad pushed through. 23 men in the kill zone. None had time to understand what was happening. The steel darts shredded the entire group. Gun 5's round hit the western breech. The lead sapper was carrying a satchel charged 12 pounds of TNT, which detonated when flechettes punctured it. The secondary explosion killed 5 more NVA behind him. In 15 seconds, 3 breach points had been closed. The NVA assault stalled, stopped. Survivors went to ground, confused, unable to understand how howitzers were firing directly into the wire. The NVA commander had fought Americans for 4 years. He'd survived arc-light strikes, napalm, helicopter gunships, but he'd never seen Americans use their own artillery as direct-fire weapons at point-blank range. He tried to adapt, ordered mortar crews to target the American guns directly. The first NVA mortar round landed near Gun 3. The second hit Gun 1's ammunition pit, killing 2 crew members. But Keller anticipated this. Quote, "All guns, shift fire. Load HE. Deflection 2900. Elevation 150 mils. Charge 3. Target enemy mortars 200 meters north-northwest." Now the howitzers shifted back to indirect fire, but at close range, at 200 meters with light powder charges, firing over the perimeter into the jungle. 4 high-explosive rounds walked across a 100-meter zone. Orange fireballs, trees exploding, earth erupting. The NVA mortar fire stopped. At 22:03, the NVA tried again. Different approach, massing 40 men at the North Gap, hoping to overwhelm through speed before Americans could respond. Kowalski at Gun 4 saw them coming. Shapes in darkness, maybe 60 meters out, moving fast. He didn't wait for clearance. Quote, "Loading beehive." Rodriguez slammed another M546 round into the breech. Kowalski adjusted deflection 2 degrees right. He pulled the lanyard. The howitzer roared. The muzzle flash illuminated the entire north perimeter for a split second long enough to see 40 NVA soldiers in full sprint, AK-47s raised, 10 meters closer than last time. Then the flechettes hit. At 60 meters, the cone pattern was wider, nearly 50 meters across. 8,000 steel darts created a horizontal metal storm. Bodies jerked backward, men torn apart mid-stride. The assault wave collapsed like puppet strings had been cut. 3 seconds later, nothing moved. Between 22:03 and 22:30, the NVA attempted 3 more assaults. Each time, Keller's guns fired beehive in direct fire mode. Each time, the defense held. The NVA couldn't penetrate a defense that could throw 8,000 steel darts at them every 30 seconds. At 22:47, Keller heard the most beautiful sound in Vietnam, the drone of a C-47 gunship. Quote, "Shepherd 6, this is Spooky 2-3, on station." The AC-47 mounted 3 7.62mm miniguns, 6,000 rounds per minute each. From 3,000 feet, it looked like a solid red beam connecting aircraft to Earth. The sound was like tearing canvas, magnified 100 times. The jungle north of Firebase Shepherd disintegrated. The NVA assault broke. Survivors withdrew, dragging wounded, leaving bodies. By 2300, the firebase was secure. The silence after combat is louder than combat itself. Keller stepped out of the FDC at 23:15. His ears rang. His hands shook. The firebase smelled like burned propellant, blood, and death. Bodies lay in the wire NVA, shredded by flechettes. Gun 3 was a smoking ruin. The perimeter berm was scarred by RPG hits. Sergeant Garrett found him. Quote, "Keller, you crazy son of a bitch." Quote, "Body count is 73 confirmed NVA in the wire," Garrett continued. Quote, "Spooky got probably another 30. We lost 8 KIA, 14 wounded. Numbers." Keller understood numbers. Quote, "If we hadn't fired beehive," quote, "we'd all be dead," Garrett finished. Captain Marsh appeared, face pale. Quote, "Specialist Keller. That was the most unorthodox, dangerous, and completely against doctrine thing I've ever seen." He paused. Quote, It also saved this firebase. I'm recommending you for the Silver Star. The medevac Hueys arrived at 100 rotors beating air, red crosses visible on white squares. The wounded went out first, then the dead, in ponchos, stacked like cordwood. Keller helped load them. Recognized faces. The kid from Gun 3 who'd asked to borrow his Playboy. Others whose names he'd never learned. He sat on a sandbag at 0300, smoking a cigarette, and counted 102 days left in country. The Army didn't want to acknowledge that doctrine had failed, that a 22-year-old specialist had improvised a solution that violated every artillery manual. So the after-action report was filed, read by a few officers at Fort Sill, and quietly forgotten. But the story spread anyway the way stories spread in Vietnam. Word of mouth, unit to unit, over beers and radio chatter. Quote, "Did you hear about Shepard? They fired beehives straight at the wire." Other FDC specialists started asking questions. Fire support coordinators began quietly calculating direct fire solutions for worst-case scenarios. Some firebase commanders started pre-positioning beehive rounds with simplified instructions. Quote, "If they breach the wire, load beehive, deflection 0, fire at the gap." In April 1969, Firebase Nancy, 40 kilometers south, was hit by a battalion-sized assault. The FDC used direct fire beehive, crediting, quote, "lessons learned" from Firebase Shepard. In May, Firebase Henderson did the same. By summer, direct fire artillery defense was an unofficial standard practice at undersized firebases throughout I Corps, not in the manual, not officially taught, but passed from veteran to FNG. Quote, "If they get inside the wire, don't wait for orders. Just do it." The Army never officially adopted it as doctrine. Too many political problems with acknowledging conventional defense was inadequate. But in Vietnam, survival mattered more than regulations. Keller never knew this. He was too busy trying to survive his remaining 102 days. James Keller rotated out August 24, 1969. His DEROS finally arrived after 397 days in country. He flew home on a commercial 707, still wearing jungle fatigues, sitting between businessmen who didn't ask questions. Landed at Travis Air Force Base at 0400. No parade, no ceremony, just a processing center and a bus ticket to Pennsylvania. He walked through San Francisco Airport, still in uniform. A woman spat on him, called him a baby killer. Airport security escorted her away. Keller just kept walking, numb, too exhausted to feel anything. His father picked him up at the Wilkes-Barre bus station, shook his hand, didn't hug him, said, quote, "Good to have you home, son." But Jimmy Keller hadn't survived unchanged. Linda, his fiancée, tried. She wanted to set a wedding date, plan the future, move forward. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the wire gaps, saw bodies shredded by flechettes, heard howitzers firing at 0 elevation, smelled burned propellant and blood. "They broke up in November 1969, she cried. He didn't. He couldn't feel anything. For 3 years, James Keller didn't talk about Vietnam. He worked at the hardware store, did the books, helped customers, and pretended he was fine. The nightmares came every night, always the same, calculating firing solutions and realizing too late his math was wrong, that the flechettes would hit American positions, that everyone would die because he'd made a mistake. He'd wake at 0300, always 0300. The time the medevac Hueys had arrived, soaked in sweat, heart pounding. He tried drinking, tried sleeping pills, tried working himself to exhaustion. Nothing stopped the nightmares. In 1974, he collapsed at the store. Heart palpitations, anxiety. His father looked at him with something between pity and incomprehension. Quote, "Your brother came back from the war, fine. Why can't you?" Because Normandy had parades, Jimmy wanted to scream. Because World War II had a purpose everyone agreed on. Because his father had never fired artillery at his own feet while NVA sappers were 20 meters away. But he just said, quote, "I don't know, Dad." In 1982, 13 years after Firebase, Shepard Keller attended his first unit reunion. Sergeant Garrett had tracked him down. 20 guys showed up at Fort Sill. Kowalski was there, now an insurance salesman in Chicago, drinking too much, divorced twice. Nguyen, working as an engineer in San Jose, married with kids, but with the same look in his eyes Keller saw in the mirror. They talked, not about the war at first, but eventually, at 0200 in a Holiday Inn bar, Kowalski said it. Quote, "I still see them, the bodies, in the wire." Everyone nodded. Quote, "Do you think it was worth it?" Nguyen asked. Nobody answered. Because the question wasn't whether Firebase Shepherd was worth defending. The question was whether the whole war was worth it. Garrett raised his beer. Quote, "To the men who didn't make it home, they drank to that." Keller finally talked about Firebase Shepherd that night, told the story of the calculations, of the decision, of watching the NVA assault break. Kowalski listened and said, quote, "You saved my life that night, Keller. Saved all our lives. I never thanked you. Quote, you pulled the lanyard. You took the risk. Quote, you did the math." They sat in silence. Quote, "I think about Morrison a lot," Keller said. Quote, "Gun 3. He didn't make it." Quote, "That wasn't your fault," Garrett said. Quote, "The NVA killed Morrison. You kept the rest of us alive." Keller wanted to believe that. Couldn't quite manage it. The U.S. Army never officially adopted direct-fire beehive artillery as doctrine. The reasons were political. Acknowledging conventional fire-based defense was inadequate meant admitting failure. Acknowledging a junior specialist improvised a better solution meant admitting doctrine was incomplete. But in the informal networks where soldiers actually learned to survive, Keller's innovation persisted. At Fort Sill, artillery instructors began mentioning, quote, unconventional direct-fire applications in advanced courses. A few after-action reports from Vietnam, including Firebase Shepherd, were added to the artillery school library. Classified, but accessible to students who asked. In 1983, the Israeli Defense Forces, studying American experiences in Vietnam, incorporated direct-fire artillery defense into their fire-based security doctrine. Israeli artillery officers visiting Fort Sill specifically asked about, quote, the Shepherd technique. In 2012, at a Marine fire base in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, a Taliban assault breached the wire during a complex attack. A young artillery sergeant who'd read about Firebase Shepherd in an online military history forum ordered his guns to fire beehive in direct fire mode. The assault broke. The technique worked exactly as it had 43 years earlier. That sergeant was reprimanded for violating fire control protocols. His battalion commander quietly withdrew the reprimand after reading the after-action report. Doctrine still hasn't changed, but the stories persist. James Keller is 78 years old now, living in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. He married in 1985 a woman named Carol, a teacher, who never asked about Vietnam unless he wanted to talk. They had no children. The Agent Orange issue, whether real or imagined, haunted him enough that he didn't want to risk it. He attended unit reunions every year after 1982. The group got smaller every time. By 2010, only 8 were left. In 2019, Kowalski died of lung cancer. At the funeral, 5 veterans, all in their 70s, sat together and told stories. Quote, remember when Keller said we were going to fire beehive at the wire? Quote, I thought he'd lost his mind. Quote, we all did. But it worked. Silence. Quote, does it ever get easier? Thinking about it. Quote, no, Keller said. Quote, but you learn to carry it. That's the closest he ever came to making peace with Firebase Shepherd. He volunteers at the VA hospital twice a week now, talking with younger veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. He doesn't tell them about Firebase Shepherd unless they ask. Most don't ask. His Bronze Star sits in a drawer, still in its case, never displayed. He still has nightmares about the wire gaps. Not every night anymore, but often enough. Carol understands. Doesn't try to fix it. Just holds his hand when he wakes at 0300. Every March 17th, the anniversary, he drives to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington. He finds the names. Morrison, the others from Gun 3. He stands there and thinks about the math, about the equation that saved 79 Americans at the cost of 8 dead and 110 NVA dead. The math worked. Firebase Shepherd survived, But math doesn't account for nightmares, or broken marriages, or 55 years of carrying weight that never gets lighter. James Keller's story isn't about glory. Vietnam didn't have glory, just survival and sacrifice. But his innovation, born of desperation, executed under fire, never officially recognized, shows that even in the most controversial war, individual courage and quick thinking still mattered. Not to win the war. That was already being lost. But to bring men home, to survive another night, to turn a firebase into a killing zone, the NVA couldn't overrun. And sometimes, when the math works and your brothers go home alive, that's enough. Even when the nightmares never stop. Even when the country never says thank you. Even when the war follows you home for 55 years. It has to be enough. What would you have done with 102 days left in country, NVA, inside the wire, and no help coming? Could you have broken doctrine, violated every rule you'd been taught, knowing that if you were wrong, everyone would die because of your decision? Here's what most people don't understand about Firebase Shepherd. Keller didn't just save lives that night. He proved that sometimes the manual is wrong. That sometimes a 22-year-old with a calculator knows more than generals with decades of experience. That innovation happens in crisis, not committee meetings. What part of this story stayed with you? Was it the mathematics under fire? The complexity of surviving not just the battle, but the decades after? The quiet courage of men who fought for each other even when they questioned why they were there? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you served in Vietnam or know someone who did, let us know. If you believe these stories deserve to be told, even when they complicate our understanding of war, share this with someone who should hear it. Because sometimes courage and controversy can coexist. Because soldiers deserve honor even when wars don't. Because these men fought for each other, even when they questioned why. And because James Keller is 78 years old now, still carrying Firebase Shepherd, still wondering if the math was worth it. Maybe hearing his story is the only equation that matters.